What if I told you that the ruins left behind by ancient civilizations are not just the remnants of stone and dust, but of forgotten consciousness? We stare in awe at the pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of South America, the submerged temples of Dvarka and Yanaguni. We wonder how they were built, what technology they used, and why they disappeared. But rarely do we ask the deeper question, what really happened to the people who built them? Not just their bodies, but their souls, their awareness, their connection to something far greater than the physical world. Most explanations focus on war, drought, disease, or economic collapse. But these are the surface ripples. The real shift, the fall beneath the fall, is spiritual. Ancient civilizations didn't just vanish. They descended. From higher states of consciousness into fragmentation. From harmony with nature into control and chaos. From the sacred to the profane. This is the untold story hidden beneath the myths of Atlantis, the fall of Sumer, and the disappearance of the Maya. It's a pattern that repeats like a forgotten song. When a people loses its inner light, the outer world begins to crumble. In this video, we will peel back the layers of history to reveal the esoteric truth behind the collapse of great ancient civilizations. We will explore the spiritual principles they lived by, the sacred knowledge they guarded, and the invisible forces that led to their undoing. You'll discover why their downfall is not just history, it's prophecy. Because what they lost, we are in danger of losing again. But also, what they knew, we are beginning to remember. Prepare to see the past through different eyes. Not as a timeline of empires, but as a spiral of awakening and forgetting. A cycle that continues until someone, perhaps you, decides to break it. To understand why ancient civilizations truly vanished, we must first understand what they were striving to become. These societies, Egyptian, Sumerian, Vedic, Mayan, Atlantean, were not merely political entities or primitive cultures. They were spiritual ecosystems. Their temples were not just places of worship, they were energetic constructs, calibrated to mirror the harmony of the cosmos. Their leaders were not politicians, but often initiates in sacred knowledge. And their societies, at their height, were deeply attuned to the rhythms of the earth, the stars, and the inner worlds of consciousness. Let us begin with Egypt. Long before the dynasties of pharaohs and golden tombs, there was a mysterious age referred to by the ancient priests as Zep-Tepi, the first time. According to Egyptian mythology, this was an era when gods walked among men, and knowledge was transmitted directly from higher beings to awakened humans. The pyramids, which modern science still struggles to explain, are remnants of that time, a time when geometry was sacred, when sound was used for healing, and when the soul's journey after death was mapped with stunning precision in the Book of the Dead. Similarly, in India, the Vedic texts speak of Satya Yuga, a golden age when truth, dharma, and divine order prevailed. This was not just metaphor. It was an encoded reference to a state of collective consciousness in alignment with universal law. In the Americas, the Maya developed an astonishingly complex calendar system, not merely to track time, but to mark the cyclical unfolding of spiritual epochs. Their understanding of time was fractal, recursive, and deeply tied to the soul's evolution. Across the oceans, Plato wrote of Atlantis, a civilization that once embodied great wisdom, but fell due to spiritual arrogance and moral decay. He claimed his story came from Egyptian priests, and he was not alone. Many ancient sources, from the Emerald Tablet to Gnostic scriptures, hint at a great fall, not just of a city, but of human consciousness itself. In esoteric traditions, this fall is often described not as a single event, but as a descent from unity to duality, from divine alignment to ego fragmentation. And when a people descends far enough into ego, into separation, the outer world mirrors that dissonance. Ecosystems collapse. Wars erupt. Sacred knowledge is forgotten. And eventually, the civilization vanishes, not just from maps, but from memory. But some clues remain. Symbols etched in stone, stories encoded in myth, alignments that defy logic but speak to higher intention. All point to a time when humanity walked a very different path, one based not on domination of the earth, but communion with it. And yet, every one of these civilizations reached a point of divergence, a threshold where they turned away from their spiritual compass. They began to misuse the very power that had once elevated them. Knowledge became control. Rituals became hollow. Temples became monuments rather than living gateways. This, according to Hermetic and Theosophical teachings, is the true reason civilizations fall. When the sacred is forgotten, the structure decays from within. But this insight is not a cause for despair. It is a map. A warning. And perhaps, most importantly, a doorway. Because if history is not linear, but cyclical, then what was lost can be remembered. And what fell can rise again. Imagine a grand temple, not one made of stone, but of frequency. Each column is a virtue. Each step is an initiation. Each chamber echoes with the resonance of higher truths. This is what ancient civilizations built, not just outwardly, but inwardly. The temple was always a mirror of the soul. And yet, like any structure, it could be compromised, not by earthquakes or enemies, but by forgetting. At the core of every advanced ancient civilization was a spiritual science, a living understanding of how the universe works, how energy moves, and how consciousness evolves. This science wasn't separated from daily life, it was life. Agriculture followed celestial alignments. Architecture encoded sacred geometry. Healing worked through sound, herbs, and the subtle body. Leadership was not inherited by bloodline alone, but often required deep spiritual training and inner purification. But what happens when this spiritual science is used not to uplift, but to control? This is where the downfall begins. And it happens the same way in every age. Let's take Atlantis as a symbolic case. Whether it was a literal continent or a metaphysical memory passed down through mystery schools, its story holds a key. According to esoteric sources like Edgar Cayce and theosophical texts, Atlantis was a civilization of immense spiritual and technological power. Its people had mastered crystal energy, consciousness projection, and interdimensional travel. They were priest-scientists, guardians of a sacred balance. But something shifted. A division arose between those who sought wisdom for service, and those who sought power for domination. The latter began experimenting with nature in reckless ways, manipulating DNA, harnessing energy to control weather, even altering human consciousness for subjugation. Sound familiar? This turning point, the shift from sacred knowledge to profane technology, is a pattern. In Egypt, the priesthood became politicized. The rituals were maintained, but their original purpose, soul transformation, was diluted. Symbols lost their living charge and became decorations. Access to the inner teachings was restricted, hidden, or lost. In Sumer, the wisdom of the stars was institutionalized. The Anunnaki myths, once metaphors for celestial laws, became literalized, then distorted. In the Indus Valley, as the Vedic truths fragmented, caste systems hardened and the deeper esoteric meanings were buried beneath religious formalism. In all these cases, one thing happened before the fall. The outer structure remained intact, but the inner fire was extinguished. This mirrors the human condition. Think of a person who goes through the motions of life, says all the right words, performs all the right rituals, but the spark is gone. The soul is asleep. The temple is cold. Ancient civilizations vanished because they stopped serving the sacred. But it wasn't just forgetfulness, it was a vibrational decline. When the collective frequency of a people drops below a certain threshold, the physical world begins to reflect that loss of coherence. Disasters come not as punishments, but as echoes of inner disorder. The land ceases to yield. The skies withhold rain. The people turn against each other. The gods are silent, because they were never out there. They were within. And when we fall out of alignment, they vanish with us. This understanding, that spiritual decline precedes material collapse, is one of the deepest insights guarded by mystery schools throughout history. And now, as modern civilization approaches its own tipping point, we are being asked to remember it again. Let us now go deeper, beyond the temples, beyond the myths, into the subtle mechanics of spiritual collapse. Because civilizations do not vanish overnight. They unravel, energetically, morally, and metaphysically. And at the center of that unraveling is one silent force. Disconnection. Disconnection from the earth. Disconnection from the inner self. Disconnection from the divine order that once animated every aspect of life. In esoteric teachings, especially those rooted in Hermeticism and ancient Eastern philosophies, there is a principle known as above, so below. This isn't just a poetic phrase, it is a formula. A map. It means that when a society is aligned with the higher planes, truth, beauty, order, it reflects those principles in the material world. Harmony flows. Wisdom guides action. Nature thrives. But when a civilization begins to prioritize material power, ego, and domination over spiritual truth, that alignment fractures. And just as a body becomes sick when its vital systems fall out of sync, a society begins to decay from the inside out. Let's look at this through the metaphor of a sacred flame. In many ancient traditions, the sacred flame represents the living connection between the divine and the human. It is nurtured through ritual, intention, virtue, and deep inner work. When the flame is strong, it lights the entire city, metaphorically and literally. The people feel purpose. The rulers lead with wisdom. The land responds with abundance. But the flame is fragile. If it is neglected. If greed replaces reverence. If dogma replaces living truth. Then the flame dims. Then dies. And with it, the civilization begins to forget who it is. This is why the downfall of ancient societies is often preceded by a sudden rise in monumental construction, massive temples, statues, tombs. It's not always a sign of strength. It can be a desperate attempt to preserve something that has already begun to fade. A hollow echo of former glory. In Egypt, for example, the Old Kingdom built the Great Pyramids, sacred structures aligned perfectly with the stars. But as later dynasties took power, the spiritual knowledge behind those structures was lost. Temples became political tools. Initiations turned into ceremonies with no real inner power. The sacred flame dimmed. And yet, the ruins remain. Because stone remembers what minds forget. This brings us to one of the most powerful and paradoxical truths. Ancient civilizations did not truly vanish, they descended into density. They fell not off the face of the earth, but into lower vibrations of consciousness. This is why traces of them are still found in our modern world, not just in artifacts and ruins, but in symbols, languages, rituals, and even bloodlines. The knowledge wasn't destroyed. It was hidden. Buried. Encoded. And in every generation, there are those who awaken, who begin to remember. You are one of them. This remembrance is not about nostalgia. It is about reclaiming the essence that made those civilizations great. Their alignment with universal law. Their devotion to inner growth. Their understanding that the material world is a reflection of the spiritual. We are now living in a time of potential rebirth, or repetition. The same choice stands before us. To rise into alignment, or descend into forgetfulness. The ancient world whispers its warning, not to frighten us, but to guide us. Because the real reason civilizations vanish is the same reason souls fall asleep. And the real way they return is through awakening. So now the question becomes, what do we do with this knowledge? If civilizations fall when they forget the sacred, then perhaps we begin to rise when we remember it. The wisdom of the ancients is not lost, it is alive, waiting to be reawakened not in dusty books or crumbling stones, but in you. Each of us is a temple. Each of us holds a sacred flame. And every choice we make either nourishes that flame, or dims it. Here are a few powerful, practical ways to begin reigniting the inner flame and aligning your life with the ancient principles that sustained great civilizations. 1. Re-establish a sacred rhythm. Ancient people lived by the cycles of the sun, the moon, and the stars. Their lives flowed with the seasons. Begin to attune yourself to this rhythm again. Wake with the sun. Observe the lunar phases. Celebrate the solstices and equinoxes. These aren't just nature events, they are energetic portals. Aligning with them naturally restores your connection to universal law. 2. Purify the inner temple. In every ancient mystery school, purification came before initiation. You cannot hold divine light in a vessel clouded with noise, distraction, or emotional pollution. This doesn't mean perfection. It means intention. Practice mental clarity. Fast occasionally. Remove toxic influences, be they media, habits, or relationships. Make space for the sacred to return. 3. Practice living symbolism. Ancient civilizations encoded truth in symbols because symbols speak to the subconscious. Use this in your life. Wear or meditate on symbols like the ankh, the flower of life, or the triskelion. Contemplate their meanings. Place sacred geometry in your environment, not as decoration, but as energetic anchors. 4. Rekindle the sacred fire through inner ritual. You don't need a temple to perform a ritual. Your breath, your body, your attention, they are the sacred tools. Create simple, intentional daily practices. Light a candle with presence. Speak affirmations aloud. Offer gratitude to the unseen forces that guide you. These acts may seem small, but they reignite remembrance. 5. Seek wisdom beyond the surface. Don't just read history. Read between the lines. Approach ancient texts, like the Kybalion, the Bhagavad Gita, or the Book of the Dead, not as stories, but as blueprints for inner transformation. Ask, what is this really pointing to inside of me? The answer is often beyond words, in sensation, intuition, and energy. 6. Meditate on the fall and the rise. Close your eyes. Visualize a great civilization at its height. Its beauty. Its balance. Then, watch it fall into disarray, not as punishment, but as a spiritual lesson. Now, feel yourself rebuilding it, within your own life. What must rise in you for a new golden age to begin? 7. Live as if you are remembering something. Because you are. When you start to feel ancient truths stirring inside you, trust them. Speak less from what you've learned, and more from what you know. That knowing is the inheritance left by those who walked before you, waiting for you to claim it. The fall of ancient civilizations is not just history. It is initiation. We are being invited to remember, to embody what was forgotten, and to build something even greater, not from stone, but from spirit. And it begins not with revolution, but with revelation. One choice at a time. One breath. One flame. Rekindled. So now you know. Ancient civilizations didn't just vanish beneath the sand, or sink beneath the sea. They faded, from within. Not because they were weak, but because they forgot who they truly were. They forgot that they were more than empires. More than builders of monuments. They were caretakers of a sacred fire, an invisible force that links soul to cosmos, the human to the divine. And when that fire went out, so did their world. But here is the great truth. That fire has not been extinguished. It has only changed form. It lives now in you. Every time you choose truth over illusion, presence over distraction, wisdom over noise, you become a vessel for that ancient light. You don't just study history. You rewrite it. Because if civilizations fall when they forget the sacred, then they rise when one person remembers. And maybe that person is you. So look within. Ask yourself, where am I asleep? Where have I forgotten the sacred rhythm, the deeper purpose, the quiet fire inside me? Then act. Not in grand, dramatic ways, but in the small, sacred choices that no one sees. That is how a new civilization is born, quietly, in the stillness of the soul, one heart at a time. You are not too late. You are right on time. The ancient world is not gone. It is waiting to rise again, through you. Thank you for watching. If this message stirred something in you, let it grow. Reflect on it. Live it. And share it. Because the more we remember, the faster we awaken. And perhaps, just perhaps, this time, we won't forget.